This is a stage where you're trying to catch the ox and own it for yourself. This is you going beyond the initial first glimpses and starting to really embody awakening in your everyday life, and also realizing how much more difficult it is to do that than you thought. Here's what the Zen master has to say. Quote, "Just catching the ox is not enough. You must get a tight rope on it, tame it, and make it your own. A mind of thoughts and attachments can't possibly fathom the spirit of the ox that is called original face. With your head full of thoughts of good and bad, pretty and ugly, even should you seek out the spirit of the ox of Buddha nature, there is no way that you would be able to recognize it if you saw it. Don't deceive yourself into thinking that you can feed it your desires and attachments, your passions and self-delusions. The ox of fundamental wholeness will run away at the mere smell of them. If there is even the slightest whiff of impurity, the ox won't touch the grass. The ox of fundamental wholeness detests even the smell of the actual. It is strictly pure. It hates the world of desires and attachments, passions and self-delusions, and it will trot right off to the mountains." End quote. So here is where you're in for the sort of rude awakening that in order to really catch this ox, you're going to have to completely surrender yourself. Turn your entire psyche inside out. Your egotism stands in the way of you catching the ox and taming the ox. And so now you have to make a choice. Your devilish ego self and your old depraved, deluded life, full of attachments and cravings and suffering and desire and addictions and hedonism, or the ox. You can't have both. And you can't attain the ox so long as you have your fantasies about what spirituality is, what religion is, what God is, what the ox is, what good and evil are, what the devil is, your various political ideologies and your economic ideologies and capitalism and socialism and liberalism, conservatism, and all of this junk, all of this fantasy, all of this social programming. This you have to discard if you want the ox. You cannot have the full ox and also maintain all of that nonsense that your ego was using to maintain its grip on reality. See, a lot of egos, what they try to do with spirituality is they think that, oh, well, I'm gonna catch this ox, and then I'm gonna own this ox. I'm gonna monopolize this ox for myself, and then I'll sell the ox, and I'll make a bunch of money off the ox, and then I'll have a bunch of sex using the ox, and then I'm gonna look cool using the ox. I'm gonna get a bunch of fame and status using the ox. I'm gonna build a religion in my name using the ox, and I'm gonna develop this cult using the ox. And that won't work, because all of that stuff is fantasy. And the only reason you want to do any of that stuff is because you don't really have the ox. You haven't tamed the ox. You haven't fully realized what the ox is. Because if you did, the ox would irradiate and expunge, blot out all of this egotistical craving within you, all of these schemes and machinations and manipulations that you are trying to attain in the name of the ox. And this is how all of the world's greatest evils happen. All of the evils of religion happen this way, is that rather than actually fully pursuing and surrendering to the ox, the religious person tries to turn the ox into some kind of religious system. But the ox will not ever be turned into any kind of system, into any kind of picture or model or map, because the ox is the territory, not the map. And this is where people get caught in the trap of talking about the ox, theorizing about the ox, building a philosophical system about the ox, when they really are avoiding the very difficult thing, which is letting go of all of that, surrendering all of that, emptying yourself before the ox, only then will the ox allow you to approach it closely enough so that you can tame it. The Zen master goes on to say, quote, you may have caught the ox, but it is no easy matter to break it and finally to make it your own. It is like killing a snake. It's still twitching. Your mouth is going moo, but your tail is still twitching. You are not completely dead yet. So long as you do not first attain the great death, the samadhi of moo, you will never catch the ox. End quote. So mu in Zen is just another name for the absolute, for God, for the ox, for infinite consciousness, your true nature. That's mu. The realization that all of reality is nothing. That's mu. You see, so even though maybe you've glimpsed mu, the question is, have you fully died to it? Or is your ego still twitching and it's going to come back to life like a zombie? And now it's going to turn into this sort of spiritualized zombie, where now, of course, you've got a little taste of awakening and you kind of know what it's like. But your ego is still alive and kicking. It's still on its last breath. And so if you're not careful, that ego will make all sorts of devilish work out of this glimpse of awakening that you've had. And that can become very dangerous. You might, for example, want to start a cult now based on your little bit of awakening. And then that cult, though, is going to be fueled by all the cravings and attachments of your ego, which you are still not willing to fully surrender in order to truly awaken. Because if you were truly awake, you would never start a cult. Because cults are falsehood and awakening is truth. And there's also no need, once you're awake, to have admiration from others or to build any kind of pyramid structure with you on top. You don't need social status. You don't need fame. You don't need money. You don't need sex. None of these things are needed anymore because the ox has satisfied everything within you. The ox has made you complete, but that's only once you fully tame the ox. At this stage, you haven't done that yet, so you still have various kinds of base needs. The bottom tier of Maslow's pyramid of psychological needs: food, sex, shelter, survival, and self-esteem and need for love and all this. You still have these, even though you've had a little bit of Satori.